Good afternoon, everyone. This is Kennedy, host of the Kids Hub Book Club and president of the Kids Hub Media Network. This week, I'm going to be reviewing Chapter 15 of To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, and this review is sponsored by Kids Need to Read. You can visit their website, www.kidsneedtoread.org. So, this week is a pretty dramatic chapter. There is, Atticus really starting to be portrayed as a lawyer, as his actual job. And I think up until now, for the readers, Harper Lee has shown his job as a mediator and his fight for justice in the way that he interacts in his own home. But I don't think we've really seen him be a lawyer in context of his work. And I think that we see that for the first time. Just a quick point worth mentioning, Harper Lee, who's the author, actually grew up in Alabama. And I know that because this week I had to give a presentation in French class on some books or pieces of literature in general that may have caused a scandal or had a strong reaction. And I chose To Kill a Mockingbird, partially because I am reviewing it with Kids Hub, but also because it's one of my favorite books, but it also happened to be pretty controversial. And I learned that Harper Lee was from Alabama, and I think that it's interesting because she grew up in that time period. So this book is very, I guess you could say it's almost like a memoir, but from the fiction perspective in a sense, because the events in this book didn't actually necessarily occur, but very similar events could have occurred during that time. So it's pretty autobiographical, and so she uses these characters to really tell a narrative of something that she experienced herself. So I think that this role of perspective is also very interesting because these are things that she could probably account for on her own, but she's put it into the shape of a story in someone else's family and other events when I'm sure that other Americans or people who lived in Alabama at this time, if they read this novel, they could probably say that things like this did happen very similarly to the way that she describes them. So this book is also a good way to learn about history or a supplement to American history during that specific time. So in Chapter 15, well, just quickly, I'll mention that last week we learned that Dill, who was that neighbor from Meridian, Florida, has come back, but his family doesn't know that he's here. But he has an aunt who lives nearby, and I believe Atticus has the children tell the aunt that he's staying at their house just to be safe. And the trial is actually coming nearer and nearer. And so I think the trial is something in this book that obviously is going to take place in the book, but it's something that we've been expecting as readers for several chapters now because we know that it's something that Atticus is working on. But we also know that this trial has caused some turmoil for his family because he's representing a black man and he's in the South, and that's not something that happened very often, or at least often where a white man would willingly do something like this. But Atticus is willing to do so, and of course his children have been teased about it, and their aunt, who's Atticus's sister, has been spending time with them more and more recently. And I know that the aunt, or the readers know that the aunt and Atticus have really been disagreeing about this trial because she thinks that his job is disgraceful, that she doesn't see any good in it. And it's interesting to me because they were raised in the same family, but their personalities are very different. For Atticus, justice is justice, and justice is colorblind. Justice should be colorblind, but his sister obviously doesn't think so. And we got a sense of that in a couple chapters ago when Calpurnia, who is the family's housekeeper, who is black, took the children to church with her, and the aunt didn't like that, and she didn't think it should happen again. So from that point, you pretty much have in your mind set the way the aunt's stance is on the issue. But Atticus leaves the home, and he decides to drive down to the jail because Tom Robinson, who is the man that he's representing, is being transferred to a different jail, and he wants to make sure that he's safe because during these times in this specific place, this man was very vulnerable, and he could have been attacked by a mob who had something against him. So Atticus is trying to act in Tom Robinson's best interest. So this is once again Atticus putting his own well-being emotionally and physically on the side to do his job properly. And so he gets to the Maycomb jail, but his kids, Scout and Jem, along with Dill, actually follow him there. But I remember when I read this book the first time, that part confused me a bit because I wasn't really sure why they would follow them there, if they knew that it was his job to go there, and if they knew they didn't belong there. But if you know from previous chapters, they are characteristically, I wouldn't say mischievous, but they're very, very curious, and they know that just by asking their father, they're not going to get the answers that they are seeking. They're not going to be satisfied. So they decide to follow him to the jail where Tom Robinson is staying. And then I believe the police arrive to see what's going on, and they say that Atticus has to get his children to leave because Scout ends up coming out of her hiding place, and Atticus tells them to go home, but they don't. But then Atticus says that the children have to go home because it's not a safe place for them to be. And at the same time, I think that there's a little bit of comic relief in this chapter. And for anyone who doesn't know what comic relief is, it can be when there is a very, very tense moment in the plot, and the author, in order to lighten the mood or to restore the book back to its original tone, may include something that maybe isn't necessarily funny, but is a lot more lighthearted. And one of the men who arrives at this scene is Walter Cunningham, Mr. Cunningham, and this is one of Scout's classmates' fathers, and one of her classmates' dad. And then she begins to talk to him and really just be a kid, and asks that he tells his son hi for her. And so this really removes the tension from the situation, and eventually Scout, Jem, and Dill leave when Atticus leaves. So a little bit more about the theme and comic relief. I think that a general theme for this book is definitely perspective. I guess you could say that for any book, but I think just the fact that the story is being told by Scout, but several years removed. So she's way older when she's telling this story, but she's telling them as they happened when she was, I believe, 8 or 9 years old. So that's very important. And then this idea of comic relief is something that comes up in a lot of books. I just finished reading a play by Shakespeare, and the presentation that I had to give from a certain act of the play was how a set of characters contributed to the comic relief, restoring the book to its original tone, and it's something that the authors do very intentionally. So we're getting closer to the trial in To Kill a Mockingbird. Once again, if you want to win a copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, you can put on Kids Hub's Facebook page what you think the theme of the week is. So it could be very brief, 2 to 3 sentences, maximum of 5 sentences, of why you think that's the theme this week. I have another one in mind, but I won't take that one in case it was someone else's. And then you can win a copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. Otherwise, the copy that I have is lavender, but I realized recently that there are several cover designs for it. But any bookstore that you go into and you ask for To Kill a Mockingbird, they always know what you're talking about, and the author is Harper Lee. So I look forward to reviewing Chapter 16 for everyone next week. That's Kennedy on Kids Hub, giving kids a voice in the world.